They laughed when she inherited 40 acres of swamp. But what she found when she drained the back pond would change not only her life, but the future of the entire town. If you've ever felt like the world has already decided who you are or what you're worth, then find a quiet place and listen. And maybe hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. This is for all of us who were handed a raw deal and told to be grateful for it. The air in the county services building always smelled the same: stale coffee, disinfectant, and the faint, papery scent of hopelessness. It was the smell of my entire childhood. On my 18th birthday, that smell was supposed to be replaced with the scent of freedom. Instead, it just clung to the inside of my coat as I sat across from Mrs. Gable, a woman whose face was a permanent mask of weary patience. She'd been my caseworker for the last 6 years, which meant I saw her twice a year for a 30-minute review where she'd ask questions from a checklist and never quite meet my eyes. Today was different. Today, she met my eyes. "Well, hey Laura, you've officially aged out," she said, closing a manila folder with a soft thud that sounded like a door shutting somewhere far away. "Congratulations! You've met all the program requirements. You have your transitional housing voucher, your final stipend check, and..." She paused, reaching under her desk to pull out a dusty cardboard box sealed with yellowing tape. "This." I looked at the box. It wasn't large, but it felt heavy. It felt like it had gravity. "What is it?" "Your grandfather's personal effects. They were collected from his apartment when he passed. Since you were his only known next of kin, they've been held in storage by the state. You're legally an adult now, so they're yours." My grandfather. Silas. The name felt like a stone in my mouth. I hadn't seen him since I was 7 years old, the day he'd walked me to a different county services building, knelt down, and told me he had to go away for a while. He'd promised he'd come back. He never did. 2 years later, a different caseworker, not Mrs. Gable, had told me he was gone. An accident, they said. A single-car crash on a rural highway. No other details. For 11 years, he'd been a ghost, a question I couldn't ask, a wound that wouldn't close. And now, his entire life, or what was left of it, was in a cardboard box on a government-issue desk. "Do you want me to have someone help you with it to the bus stop?" Mrs. Gable asked, her voice softening for the first time in all the years I'd known her. It was a practiced, professional sort of pity. "No," I said, my own voice sounding rough. "I can take it." I lifted the box. It was heavier than it looked. I walked out of the building without looking back, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me, cutting off the smell of my past. The city air was cold and sharp with exhaust fumes, but it was new. I stood on the sidewalk, holding the box that contained the man I barely knew, and for the first time, I had no idea where I was supposed to go next. The bus ride to the small, subsidized apartment on the edge of town was a blur. The apartment was one room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. It was clean, sterile, and utterly empty. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a holding cell with better furniture. I placed the box in the center of the floor and just stared at it for a long time. The silence in the room was absolute. In the group homes, there was never silence. There was always a TV blaring, someone yelling, someone crying, the constant hum of too many broken people crammed into too small a space. This quiet was a different kind of loud. Finally, I knelt and pulled at the tape. It was brittle and snapped under my fingers. The cardboard flaps sighed open. The top layer was just clothes. A worn flannel shirt that smelled faintly of sawdust and wintergreen. A pair of faded denim jeans with a patch on the knee. I lifted the shirt and held it to my face, breathing in. It was the ghost of a ghost, but it was something. It was more than I'd had yesterday. Beneath the clothes were objects. A tarnished silver Zippo lighter, though I'd never known him to smoke. A small hand-carved wooden bird, its wings half spread. A cracked leather wallet containing a faded photo of a woman I didn't recognize, and $3 in cash. And then, at the bottom, a thick accordion file folder. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It was stuffed with papers. Most of it was what you'd expect. Old bills, a birth certificate, his, not mine, and a few photographs. There was one of him holding me as a baby. He looked younger, happier, his smile not yet burdened by whatever came later. My heart ached looking at it. Then I saw a thick, legal-looking document. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, and covered in dense, official type. At the top, it read, Deed of Trust. I scanned the text, my eyes catching on the key phrases. Silas Rowe, my grandfather. Grantee, Elara Rowe, me. And the property description, 40 acres, located in the county of Blackwood, parcel number 7, B-221. 40 acres. It didn't seem real. People like me didn't inherit things, especially not land. We inherited trauma and a file in a social worker's cabinet. Tucked inside the deed was a simple, sealed envelope with my name on it, written in his familiar, spidery handwriting. I tore it open. The note inside was short. Elara, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're grown. I'm sorry for so many things. Most of all, I'm sorry I broke my promise. This land is all I have left to give you. It may not look like much, but don't let them take it from you for nothing. The truth is buried there. Don't trust the water. Find it, and you'll understand. Always, Silas. Don't trust the water. What did that even mean? It sounded like something from a fantasy novel, not a note from a man who'd worked as a carpenter. I set the note aside, my head spinning, and found one last document in the folder. It was a letter, much newer than the others, on crisp law firm stationery. Abernathy and Finch, attorneys at law. It was addressed to the public administrator of my county regarding the estate of Silas Rowe. It requested that upon my 18th birthday, I be contacted for a meeting to discuss the dispensation of the aforementioned property. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. At the bottom, a business card for a Mr. Gerald Abernathy was paperclipped with a handwritten note. Please call at your earliest convenience. The next day, I made the call. Mr. Abernathy's office was downtown, in one of those glass towers that seemed to scrape the clouds. It was a world away from the county services building. His office was quiet, smelled of leather and wood polish, and had a window that looked down on the entire city. He was an older man, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his sharp, legalistic way of speaking. Miss Rowe, he said, gesturing for me to sit. Thank you for coming in. I was your grandfather's attorney for a number of years. Not for anything major, you understand. He had me draw up his will, handle the title transfer for the property. Simple affairs. The 40 acres, I said, the words still feeling foreign. He nodded, pulling a file from his desk that looked much thicker than I expected. Yes, the Blackwood parcel. To be blunt, Elara, may I call you Elara? It's not exactly prime real estate. In fact, it's not real estate at all, in the conventional sense. It's a swamp. A swamp? 40 acres of it. Mostly marshland, cypress knees, and mosquitoes. The land has been in your family for generations, but it's never been developed. It's barely accessible half the year. The cabin on the property was declared uninhabitable by the county over a decade ago. He folded his hands on the desk, his expression turning serious. There's also the matter of back taxes. Your grandfather was able to keep them paid for years, but the payments stopped about 2 years before his death. The property is currently in arrears to the tune of $5,243. If it's not paid within the next 90 days, the county will seize the land and sell it at auction. The hope that had flickered in my chest guttered and died. $5,000. It might as well have been 5 million. My final stipend check was for 800. It was meant to last me until I found a job. So I'm going to lose it. Not necessarily, he said, pausing for effect. There is an interested party. A development firm, Viridian Holdings, has been trying to acquire parcels in that area for a while now. They've made a standing offer on your grandfather's land. They're prepared to pay off the tax lien and give you a cash settlement of $10,000. $10,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering. It was more money than I had ever seen. It was a new start. It was a car, a real apartment, a life. It was the smart choice, the only choice. They've been trying to buy it for a while? I asked, remembering the local developers my grandfather used to complain about. For years, Abernathy confirmed. Silas always refused. He was stubborn about that land. Sentimental, I suppose. But sentiment doesn't pay the bills, Alara. Viridian's offer is more than fair, frankly. It's generous, considering the state of the property. I've advised the public administrator's office to recommend you accept it. It's a clean break, a fresh start. I thought of my grandfather's note. Don't let them take it from you for nothing. Was $10,000 nothing? To me, it was everything. But to him, he'd held on to a useless swamp for years, even when he was struggling. He'd let me go into the system, but held on to the land. It didn't make sense. I want to see it, I said, the words coming out before I could think them through. Mr. Abernathy raised an eyebrow. See it? Alara, it's a 4-hour bus ride to the middle of nowhere. There's nothing to see. He left it to me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I want to see it before I sell it. He sighed, a long, weary sound. Very well, it's your right, of course. But the clock is ticking on those taxes. Viridian's offer won't stand forever. Don't take too long playing sentimental games in a swamp. He handed me a folder containing a copy of the deed, a plat map, and Viridian's official offer letter. The bus to Blackwood leaves from the downtown terminal twice a day. Good luck, Alara. I have a feeling you're going to need it. I walked out of his office, the sterile, air-conditioned world of the skyscraper giving way to the noise and grit of the street. I had a choice. A safe, logical choice that would give me a foothold in the world, and an illogical, sentimental choice that felt like a whisper from a ghost. I looked at the bus schedule, then at the $10,000 offer. I spent half of my stipend on a one-way ticket to Blackwood County, a bag of non-perishable food, a good flashlight, and a heavy-duty tarp. The smart choice could wait. I had to go see what my grandfather died protecting. I had to know why. The bus ride was a journey backward in time. The city's gleaming towers shrank in the rearview mirror, replaced by sprawling suburbs, then tidy towns, then, finally, nothing but endless stretches of pine forests and patchy farmland. The pavement turned from smooth blacktop to cracked asphalt. The few other passengers got off at various small town stops, until it was just me and the driver, a man with a weathered face who watched me in his mirror with a look of mild curiosity. Blackwood's the end of the line, he said as we pulled into a dusty lot beside a single gas station and a boarded-up diner. Not much here for a tourist. I'm not a tourist, I replied, shouldering my backpack. My family has land here. He grunted. Row property, out by the Cypress Deep? Figured as much. You got your granddaddy's eyes. He pointed down a narrow road that disappeared into a thick wall of trees. That's the way. It's a good 3-mile walk. Watch for snakes. The walk was like stepping into another world. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth, decaying leaves, and sweet, cloying blossoms. The sounds of the highway faded, replaced by the drone of insects and the calls of unseen birds. The road dwindled from cracked pavement to a gravel track, and then to 2 muddy ruts overgrown with weeds. My boots sank into the soft ground. The trees, cypress and tupelo, draped in Spanish moss, closed in overhead, their branches interlocking to form a canopy that blotted out the sun. It was beautiful and menacing all at once. It felt ancient and alive. After an hour of walking, I saw it through a break in the trees. A small, gray wood cabin sagging on one side, its porch roof collapsed, its windows like vacant eyes. A rusted metal gate, hanging from a single hinge, marked the entrance to the property. A faded, hand-painted sign nailed to a tree read, "Row." I was here. The property was exactly as Abernathy had described it, a swamp. The cabin stood on one of the few patches of solid ground, a small island in a sea of murky water, thick mud, and dense vegetation. The air was alive with the buzz of mosquitoes. I pushed my way through the overgrown yard, the wet leaves slapping against my face. The front door of the cabin hung ajar. I nudged it open with my foot, and it groaned in protest. The inside was a wreck. Rain had gotten in through the holes in the roof, and the floor was soft with rot in several places. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. But it was his. In one corner stood a simple wooden bed frame, the mattress long since disintegrated. In another, a small pot-bellied stove, its pipe rusted through. On a small rickety table, a tin coffee mug sat next to an old kerosene lamp. I ran my hand over the dusty surface, my fingers leaving clean trails. This was where he'd lived. This was the place he chose over me. The thought came unbidden, sharp and bitter. I spent the rest of the afternoon making a small section of the cabin habitable. I used the tarp to patch the worst of the holes in the roof over one corner of the single room. I swept out the debris, leaves, dirt, the skeletons of small animals, and laid out my sleeping bag. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. As dusk began to settle, painting the swamp in shades of purple and orange, I took the flashlight and decided to explore. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just wanted to walk the land that was mine, to feel its shape and texture. I followed a barely there path leading from the back of the cabin deeper into the property. The ground became spongier, the water deeper. The cypress trees stood like sentinels, their gnarled roots, the knees, sticking up from the water like strange, bony sculptures. It was a difficult, alien landscape. And then I saw the pond. It wasn't on the plat map Mr. Abernathy had given me. The map showed the entire 40 acres as a contiguous wetland, but this was different. It was a near-perfect circle of dark, still water, about 50 yards across. Unlike the surrounding swamp, which was teeming with life, the pond was eerily silent. No frogs croaked from its banks, no insects skimmed its surface. The trees ringing it were gray and sickly, their branches bare even in the lush environment. A strange, metallic sheen coated the water, and the air around it felt colder, dead. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. Don't trust the water. This had to be the place he meant. It felt wrong. It felt unnatural. It felt like a secret. I returned to the cabin as full darkness fell, the sounds of the swamp amplifying around me. I ate a cold can of beans for dinner, the beam of my flashlight cutting a lonely circle in the gloom. The bitterness from before had faded, replaced by a deep, gnawing curiosity. Why was this place so important to him? What was this secret he'd buried? I started searching the cabin more methodically. It had been picked over by time and the elements, but maybe he'd left something behind. I ran my hands along the walls, tapped on the floorboards. Most of the floor was soft, but near the hearth of the pot-bellied stove, where the foundation was strongest, one of the boards felt different. It was solid, and when I pressed on it, it gave just a little. I wedged my fingers into the crack and pulled. It came up with a screech of rusty nails. And there, nestled in the dark, cool earth below, was a small steel box, the kind used for cash or important documents. It was locked. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. This had to be it. I didn't have a key, but I had a tire iron I'd bought for protection. It took 10 minutes of grunting, sweating, and splintering the wood around the lock, but finally, with a loud crack, the lid popped open. Inside there was no money, no treasure. Just a stack of letters bundled together with twine. They were all addressed to me, and they were all in my grandfather's handwriting. There were dozens of them. The one on top was dated just after he left me. My hands shook as I unfolded the brittle paper. "My dearest Alara," the letter began. "I am writing this from a place you wouldn't know, a small room in a town far away. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I have to write it anyway. I have to explain. I know you must hate me. I know you must feel like I abandoned you. I would feel the same. But I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was the only way to keep you safe. I had to stop reading, my vision blurring with tears. I wiped them away angrily and continued. This land, our land, is not what it seems. A few years ago, I was approached by a man from a company that wanted to buy it. I said no. They came back with more money. I said no again. They were polite at first, but then they started getting insistent. They said they needed it for a new development, but that was a lie. I did some digging. The company was a front for a bigger corporation, one with a dirty history. I found out they weren't planning to build anything. They just wanted the land to stay quiet. They wanted it because it was already hiding their secrets. I started testing the water, the soil. Things were wrong. Things were sick. I found barrels, half buried in the mud on the far side of the property. They were old, rusted, leaking a dark, oily sludge. I took samples. I had them tested by a friend of a friend who worked at a university lab. The results were terrifying. Industrial solvents, heavy metals, things that cause cancer and birth defects. The kind of stuff that poisons everything for 100 years. The company had been using our swamp as their private, illegal dumping ground for decades. That pond you might have seen? That wasn't there when I was a boy. They dug it to contain the worst of it. They buried the evidence under a few feet of water. When I confronted them with what I knew, they didn't deny it. They just smiled. They told me I had a choice. I could keep my mouth shut and they'd leave me alone. Or I could go public and they would ruin me. They said they would make it look like I was the one who did the dumping. They would fabricate evidence, bribe officials. And then they mentioned you. They said it would be a shame if a little girl's only guardian ended up in prison for a long, long time. They said the foster care system was a rough place for a pretty kid. It wasn't a direct threat. It was worse. It was a promise. I couldn't fight them, Alara. Not then. They were too big, too powerful. And I couldn't protect you and the land at the same time. So I made a choice. I chose you. I gave you to the state where I knew you'd be safe, where they couldn't get to you to get to me. And I disappeared. I moved from town to town, working odd jobs, saving every penny to keep the taxes paid on the land, to keep it safe until you were old enough, until you were an adult and they couldn't use you against me anymore. I planned to come back for you. I swear I did. But I ran out of time. The letter fell from my hands. The whole world had tilted on its axis. The story I had told myself for 11 years, the story of a grandfather who didn't want me, who abandoned me for reasons I could never understand, was a lie. He hadn't abandoned me. He had sacrificed everything for me. He had endured a life of exile and loneliness, all to protect me, all while preserving this piece of poisoned earth, this legacy of truth. The anger and bitterness I'd held on to for so long dissolved, replaced by a wave of grief so profound it knocked the air from my lungs. I curled up on the dusty floor of the cabin, clutching his flannel shirt, and I wept. I cried for the little girl who thought she was worthless. I cried for the man who died alone, thinking he had failed. I cried for all the years we had lost. I sat there for hours, the silence of the swamp pressing in, no longer menacing, but comforting. It was his silence. When the tears finally stopped, a new feeling began to surface, cold and hard and clear. Rage. A deep, quiet rage against the faceless men who had taken my family from me, who had poisoned this land and threatened a child to cover their crimes. I picked up the letter from Viridian Holdings, the one with the $10,000 offer. It wasn't a generous offer. It was hush money. It was them trying to bury their secret one last time, with me. Don't let them take it from you for nothing. Now I understood. The land wasn't the inheritance. The truth was. And my grandfather had left it to me to unearth it. I looked out the cabin door, toward the dark, silent pond. The truth is buried there. The letters were his testimony. The proof must be at the bottom of that toxic water. My choice was clear. Mr. Abernathy's practical advice, the $10,000, the easy way out. It all seemed like a temptation from a devil I now had a name for. Viridian Holdings. I wasn't going to sell. I was going to fight. I didn't know how, but I knew where I had to start. I had to drain that pond. The next morning, I walked the 3 miles back to town. Blackwood was little more than a main street with a handful of storefronts, a post office, a grocery store with a dusty window display, a bar, and a hardware and equipment rental shop called Gus's Gear. A bell chimed as I walked in. The place smelled of oil, old metal, and fertilizer. A man who I assumed was Gus sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He was old, with a thick beard and hands like gnarled oak roots. He looked up at me over his reading glasses, his expression skeptical. "Help you?" he grunted. "I need to rent a water pump," I said. "A trash pump. A big one." He lowered his newspaper. "A trash pump? What for?" "I need to drain a pond." He stared at me for a long moment. "You're the Rowe girl, Silas's granddaughter." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Yes." "Heard you were in town. Heard Viridians sniffing around again, trying to get that land." He folded the newspaper deliberately. "Silas told them to go to hell every time they asked, for 20 years. "I know," I said. "I'm not selling." A flicker of something, respect maybe, passed through his eyes. "That pond out back, the one that ain't natural, that what you're planning on draining?" "That's the one." He stroked his beard, thinking. "That's a big job for a little thing like you. You'll need a 3-incher at least, gas-powered, and about 100 feet of discharge hose to get the water far enough away. It'll be messy, it'll stink, and it'll cost you. $75 a day, $200 deposit." I did the math in my head. My remaining money from the stipend was just over $400. The deposit alone would wipe out half of it. "Okay," I said, pulling the crumpled bills from my pocket. He counted the money, then looked at me again. "You got a way to haul it out there? Pump that size weighs 100 pounds. I hadn't thought of that. My face must have fallen because he let out a long sigh. "All right, look. I'm not supposed to do this, but Silas was a good man. A stubborn fool, but a good man. I'll run it out there for you in my truck this afternoon, but you're on your own after that. And you bring it back clean, you hear?" "I will," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he grumbled, turning to write up the rental agreement. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." That afternoon,
Gus's rusty pickup truck bounced down the muddy track to the cabin. Together, we wrestled the heavy pump off the truck bed and dragged it to the edge of the unnatural pond.
He showed me how to prime it, how to start the engine, how to connect the thick suction and discharge hoses. "Lay the hose as far into the swamp as you can get it," he instructed, pointing away from the cabin. "You don't want that poison water circulating right back where it came from. Check the oil, keep it full of gas, and be careful." He looked from the pump to me, then to the dead-looking water. "Whatever your granddaddy was fighting, I hope you find it." With that, he climbed back into his truck and drove away, leaving me alone with the rumbling machine and the monumental task ahead. I took a deep breath, pulled the starter cord, and the pump's engine roared to life, shattering the swamp's silence. The suction hose shuddered, and then a torrent of dark, foul-smelling water began to gush from the end of the discharge hose, deep in the cypress marsh. The process had begun. It was slow, grueling work. The pump was loud and vibrated constantly. I had to refill the gas tank every few hours, which meant hauling heavy cans of fuel from town. The first day, the water level barely seemed to drop. The second day, I could see a dark ring of sludge appearing around the edges of the pond. The smell got worse, a chemical bitterness that caught in the back of my throat. I slept fitfully, the chugging of the pump a constant companion. I ate my canned food, drank my bottled water, and thought about the letters. I read them over and over, drawing strength from my grandfather's words. This wasn't just for him. It was for me. It was for my name. On the third day, the pump sputtered and died. The engine was flooded. I spent 2 hours with the manual Gus had given me, my hands covered in grease and grime, taking the spark plug out, cleaning it, and trying to get it started again. I wanted to give up. I wanted to cry. I sat in the mud, covered in filth, and felt a wave of despair wash over me. This was impossible. The company was too big, the problem was too deep, and I was just one person. But then I looked at the pond. The water level was down by at least 4 feet. The banks were now wide, sloping walls of black, glistening mud. And in the center, something was beginning to emerge. Not rocks, not logs. Shapes. Regular man-made shapes. That was all the motivation I needed. I went back to the pump, and with a final, desperate pull, the engine coughed, sputtered, and roared back to life. By the morning of the 5th day, the pond was no longer a pond. It was a pit of thick, black ooze. The pump could do no more. The rest was too thick to draw. And the secret of the pond was laid bare. Lying in the center, half sunk in the toxic mud, were dozens of 55-gallon drums. They were rusted, corroded, and many of them had split open, their contents long since leached into the earth. It was a graveyard of poison. But that wasn't all. Near the cluster of barrels was a collection of smaller objects. They looked like heavy-duty plastic containers, the kind used for scientific transport, sealed with metal clips. There were 5 of them. My grandfather hadn't just known about the barrels, he had documented them. He had taken his own evidence and hidden it here, in the heart of the crime scene. Putting on the thick rubber boots and gloves I'd bought at Gus's, I waded into the pit. The mud was like quicksand, sucking at my boots with every step. The stench was overpowering. I felt dizzy, but I pushed on. I reached the first container and heaved it out of the muck. It was heavy. One by one, I dragged all 5 of them back to the solid ground of the bank. My body ached, my clothes were ruined, but my heart was pounding with a kind of fierce, triumphant energy. I had found it. Using the tire iron again, I pried open the clips on the first container. Inside, cushioned by foam, were dozens of glass vials filled with dark water and black soil. Each one was meticulously labeled with a date and a grid coordinate corresponding to a hand-drawn map of the 40 acres that was tucked into the lid. He hadn't just taken samples. He'd created a comprehensive record of the contamination. The second container held photographs. Pictures of the barrels being unloaded from unmarked trucks at night. Pictures of dead fish and birds around the property. pictures of the excavation equipment digging the pond itself. He must have hidden in the trees, risking everything to capture these images. The third container held documents. Internal memos from the original company, a chemical manufacturer that Viridian had acquired years ago. They detailed the illegal dumping program, listing the specific chemicals and the dates they were dumped. There were names, signatures. It was a complete confession, stolen from their own files. The fourth container held his own logs, detailed notebooks where he recorded everything he saw, everything he suspected, every threat they made against him. I saved the fifth and final container for last. It felt different, lighter. I opened it. Inside there was only one thing, a small portable cassette recorder and a single tape labeled, "For Ilara." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the machine. I pressed play. The tape hissed for a moment, and then I heard his voice. It was older, more tired than I remembered, but it was him. It was the voice that had read me bedtime stories, the voice that had called me his little sparrow. "Ilara," his recorded voice began, raw with an emotion he'd never shown in his letters. "If you're hearing this, it means you did it. You stubborn, brave girl. You came back. You found the truth. I'm so sorry I had to leave this burden to you. An inheritance should be a gift, not a fight. But I guess sometimes the fight is the gift." He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "These people, this company, they think they can buy and bury anything. They think that money makes them gods. But they're just men. Scared little men who poison the earth and threaten children because they're terrified of being held accountable. I couldn't beat them. I was one man and they had an army of lawyers and thugs. But maybe you can. This evidence, this is the one thing they can't buy their way out of. It's proof. It's the truth. And the truth has a weight all its own. You have a choice to make now, Sparrow. It's not a fair one, but it's yours. You can take this evidence to the authorities. It will be a long, ugly fight. Viridian will come after you. They'll lie, they'll threaten, they'll try to bury you just like they buried those barrels. Or you can use it as leverage. You can go to them, show them a little of what you have, and make them pay you to keep it quiet. They'd pay millions to make this go away. Enough money to go anywhere, be anyone, and never look back. I wouldn't blame you if you took the money. God knows, after the life you've had, you deserve an easy road. You deserve to be safe. His voice cracked. But I know you, Ilara. I know the steel in you. I knew it when you were 7 years old. You're a roe, and we don't run. Whatever you choose, know this. I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Leaving you was like tearing out my own heart. Everything I did to get back to you. I just ran out of time. Be brave, my little sparrow. Be smart. And make this place your own. The tape ended with a click. I sat there on the muddy bank, the cassette player in my lap, as the sun began to set over the poisoned land. The choice he laid out was stark. Safety and wealth, or justice and war. The easy wrong, or the harder right. $10,000 seemed like a joke now. Millions were on the table. A lifetime of security, but it would be built on his silence. It would be paid for with his surrender, and it would mean letting them win. I looked at the dilapidated cabin, the dying trees, the pit of black sludge that was once a pond. This wasn't just a swamp. This was my home. This was my history. This was the battlefield my grandfather had died defending, and he hadn't left me a burden. He had left me an armory. He had left me a purpose. I knew what I had to do. I packed up the 5 containers, cleaned myself up as best I could, and walked back into town. I went straight to Gus's shop to return the pump. He was closing up for the day. He took one look at my mud-caked boots, my determined face, and the clean, functioning pump on the hand truck behind me. He didn't ask what I found. He just nodded slowly. "Your deposit," he said, pulling $200 bills from his register. "You earned it." "Keep it," I said, pushing the money back across the counter. "For the delivery. And for the advice." I walked to the town's only payphone, the evidence packed safely in my backpack. I used the last of my change to make a long-distance call. I dialed the number on the business card from Abernathy and Finch. It was after hours, but a recorded message gave me Mr. Abernathy's direct line for emergencies. I considered this an emergency. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Abernathy?" "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice steady. "It's Ilara Rowe." There was a pause. "Ilara? Is everything all right? Did you decide to accept the offer?" "No," I said. "I'm rejecting Viridian's offer. And I need to hire you. I think you're going to want to hear what I found on my grandfather's land." I spent the next 20 minutes telling him everything. About the letters, the pond, the barrels, the samples, the documents, the tape. I could hear his breathing change on the other end of the line, the sleepiness in his voice replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Are you certain about all this?" he finally asked, his voice low. "I'm looking at it right now." Another pause. "Stay where you are. Don't talk to anyone. I'm driving down there myself. I'll be there in 4 hours. Ilara, if what you're saying is true, this changes everything. This isn't just about a piece of land anymore." "I know," I said. "It never was." I hung up the phone and sat on the bench outside the grocery store, watching the stars come out over the quiet main street of Blackwood. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an orphan. I didn't feel like a ward of the state. I felt like Silas Rowe's granddaughter. The fight ahead would be long and brutal. Viridian Holdings wouldn't go down easy. But as I sat there, waiting for the lawyer who was now my ally, I felt a sense of peace. My grandfather had left me 40 acres of swamp and a choice. I was choosing to stay. I was choosing to fight. I was choosing to turn this poisoned ground back into a home. He had spent his life protecting this truth for me. Now, I would spend mine making sure it saw the light of day. You know, my grandfather taught me that the hardest things you inherit are often the most valuable. Not land, not money, but responsibility. The chance to do the right thing when it would be so much easier to look away. He left me a choice, and in making it, I found out who I really was. What about you? What's the one thing in your life, the one principle or person or memory that you would fight for no matter the cost? I really want to know. Share your story in the comments below. This is a community for people who understand that the deepest scars often lead to the greatest strength, and your story matters here. And if you believe in second chances and fighting for what's right, please subscribe. Because this was just the beginning of my story.